I'm in a stable. How many of you took some time to be quiet this week? To be still and to know that He is God? It's a crazy month, isn't it? It's a crazy time. The schedule gets booked. I was just talking to somebody this morning, said her and her husband need to communicate better because they're double booking each other. We're doing this night. Oh, no, we're not. We're doing that. And this happens this time of year, doesn't it? And we get to running so fast that we forget who is really in control. We forget to honor the one that this month is celebrating. And so be sure, this week, each day, take some time in the morning to be quiet. Just to reflect God is and who He is, and the fact that He is with you. Remember that prayer that you pray in the morning. Remember it at lunch. Remember it before you go to bed. Take time to remember who God is and that He is still. That He is still. Be still and know that He is. Christmas is a time of waiting. I remember so clearly being a child and just chomping the bit. It took forever for Christmas to get here. As soon as the first gift went under the tree, we were consumed with Christmas Day. And we would run, we would shake, we would check under the tree. If another gift appeared, boy, we'd be shaking that and feeling it. See who it's for. Oh, that's for you. Get the next one. Oh, this is for me. And we were so excited, and it seemed like Christmas would never get here. Do you remember feeling that way? When you've got something really good that's coming down the line, you can't wait for it to get there. And that's the way Christmas was. I want to talk to you about a couple of people who were waiting for Jesus this morning. A couple of people we find in the second chapter of Luke by name of Simeon and Anna. We don't know who Simeon was. He was just a guy, but he was devout, he was faithful, he was honoring God, and we know that he was full of the Spirit. The Spirit was on him. Even before Jesus came, the Spirit was alive and working in the lives of people. The Spirit somehow the Spirit told Simeon that he would not die until he saw the hope of Israel, until he saw the Messiah. And Luke says Simeon was a man who was waiting for the consolation of Israel. He was anticipating and he was looking for it. And he knew that the Bible had prophesied. He knew that the prophets had said, there's somebody coming. He looked all the way back to Adam and Eve when God made the promise. He said, you guys have messed up. This is the paraphrased edition. You guys have messed up, and you have brought a separation between me and you that can never be bridged until I send the one who will destroy the power of Satan. Until I send the one who will crush the serpent's head, you have no hope. And there was this spirit of angst that everybody lived under. As long as they were being conscious and aware of what was going on, some people, we don't ever do that, some people just forget about it. They ignore it. Then they would just bebop through life like everything's fine, not thinking about the eternal significance of the things we do, not thinking about the fact that maybe this life is going to end one day. The older we get, the more that becomes a reality to us, doesn't it? We start thinking more and more about that. But usually as young people, that's not going to happen. We know in our heads it's going to happen. We know in our heads that nobody gets out of this world alive. But we don't really believe it because we don't act on it. We get busy doing all the things of today. Simeon, though, didn't forget it. He realized that they were broken people and they lived in this angst of not knowing. God gave them a law. God called them his people. He was an Israelite. He knew that he was one of the chosen people of God. However, None of them knew how God was going to take care of the problem of sin. And so they lived in this fear. God gave them a law. He said, if you keep this law, if you do all this just right, you will be righteous. You tell me, how many of them did it just right? Go like this. None of them did. How many of us have done it all right? None of us have. And so they lived in this angst. Yes, they would offer sacrifices, but those sacrifices didn't take away their sin. They pronounced faithfulness to God, and God valued that. But the Hebrew writer tells us the blood of bulls and goats can't take sin away. We know that. And so these people lived in this angst, and Simeon was looking forward to the consolation of Israel. He was looking forward to the time when the answers would come, when God would say, here's how I'm going to deal with this problem of sin. Here's how I'm going to put us back together, finally. And so it's 8 days after the birth of Jesus. He's to be circumcised and named and presented before the priests as the firstborn male of the family. They walk into the temple. The Spirit is spoken into Simeon's heart, and he says, go to the temple today, Simeon. Go to the temple. Simeon gets up and he goes to the temple, and he's standing there when they walk in. Can you imagine their surprise? When they walk through the door and this old man goes, you're the ones. And he walks over and he takes the baby child and he speaks a prophecy. He sings a song of praise. Simeon took the baby in his arms and he praised God, saying, Sovereign Lord, as you have promised, you may now dismiss your servant in peace. For my eyes have seen your salvation, which you prepared in the sight of all nations, a light for revelation to the Gentiles and the glory of your people Israel. God said, this is the one. Who is this Simeon? We don't know. We don't know if he was a priest. We don't know if he was just a we don't know who he was, except that he was a man who was waiting. And waiting implies looking for something. He wasn't just standing in a line waiting his turn. He was anticipating the coming of something. He was anticipating Christmas. He was waiting for something good to happen, and he was looking for that thing. And he kept looking, and God honored that looking. And so he made this revelation to Simeon. This is the one, Simeon. This is the one you've been waiting for. What a beautiful thing for Simeon to see with his own eyes what God had promised. Christmas morning was always a beautiful time. We rushed down. Of course, we couldn't touch a gift, not until Mom and Dad were there. We carry that tradition on in our family. Don't come down the stairs, not yet. You stretch that waiting and that anticipation just a little bit longer. Because there's joy in it. There's fun in anticipation. And there's fun in anticipating what God's about to do. The psalm that we read this morning, David said, God, I haven't been silent about this. You have been my keeper. You have been my defender. You have set my feet on a rock. You have raised me up from the clay and the mud and the pit. And I have been telling people all about it. I've been not anxiously, but joyously telling people the story of what you are doing and what you have done. Because there was a joy knowing that God is at work. God is present. He isn't distant from us. He hasn't forsaken us. This life gets hard sometimes, though, doesn't it? And sometimes it feels like he's a long ways away. And we don't always understand what he's doing. And sometimes we wish he'd just show up and say, Here's what I'm doing. But he doesn't always do that in specific situations, and so waiting sometimes is difficult. I took a group of kids backpacking up in the High Sierra. We got a late start that day because we had to fix our van first before we could leave camp. It broke down on the way. So we got a late start on the trail, and by the time we got to our campground, it was late in the afternoon. And as soon as we got to the campground, the clouds opened. I mean, they opened. We had just stepped foot into the campground, hadn't even taken our backpacks off, and suddenly it was a deluge that came down. So our packs got wet. We set up our tents in the deluge, unrolled our sleeping bags in the rain, stuffed them in our tent. I had a 2-man tent. Me and another man were sharing. Had another man on the trip with us. He just purchased a new tent, and he was setting up his tent, and he came over and said, I don't have any tent poles. Can I stay in your tent? I said, well, it's a 2-man tent. There's 2 of us. We'll work it. We'll work it. So we got 3 men in my tent. Did I tell you it's in the afternoon? It's not even nighttime yet, but it's getting that way. But we crawl in our tent to get out of the rain, but guess what's coming in the door? Water is flowing through our tent, about 1.5 inches deep. Did I tell you it was a deluge? Did I tell you it didn't stop for the next 11 hours? There were some towns just down the mountain from us that got completely washed away. This was a rain to stop all rains. It was amazing. We laid in our sleeping bags. We couldn't get out. We couldn't cook our dinner. We couldn't do anything. We got in our sleeping bags and we laid there with about 1.5 inches of water in the bottom of our tent. So the sleeping bag was sloshy. We found out if you lay perfectly still, the water around you will eventually get warm. But if you move, it floods in this cold water and you freeze to death. So for 11 hours, the 3 of us, shoulder to shoulder in that little tent, laid like this. For 11, I counted them. 11 hours. Look at 11 hours. I couldn't wait for the sun to come up. Oh, goodness, wait for the sun. We yelled at each other through the tents. We're afraid that some of the kids were going to freeze to death. Are you still alive? Talk to me. Yes, I'm still alive. I hate this. It was not a fun night. It was the longest 11 hours I've spent in my life. But I knew the sun was coming up. And I waited in expectation for the sun. All of us did. And the next morning when the sun did come up and the clouds parted a little bit, the sun came down on these lakes and on the peaks all around us. And we realized, and we spent the time worshiping God and realizing what He had done for us. It was all worth it. That difficult wait, the long hours passing in a miserable situation. There were a lot of prayers that went up that night, but the rain kept coming down. But God had not left us. Israel suffered for many, many years this angst of not knowing what God was going to do, but God never forsook them. He was faithful to them. And people like Simeon kept waiting, looking forward to that sunrise, looking forward to that time to come, looking forward to that Christmas. We sang last night that beautiful song, O Little Town of Bethlehem, one of my favorite Christmas songs of all times, when it speaks of this little town, quiet and still. He says, yet in your dark streets shines the everlasting light. The hopes and fears of all the years, Bethlehem, are met in you tonight. Simeon was looking forward to the hopes and fears of all the years being met in the Messiah that God was sending. And so he was pleased to wait and be faithful to God through all that time. And today, things don't always get easy for us, do they? We struggle through sickness. We struggle through disease. We struggle through loss. Jobs come and jobs go, and we move and we don't move, and things get hard and relationships get difficult. And we wonder, God, this is not the world I want to live in. And he says, that's good, because this is not the world I made you for. I want you to wait for the world I made you for. I want you to keep in mind that there's something out there ahead of you, and I have made it possible for you to go because I paid the price for your sin with the blood of my Son. And so wait. Be patient. Put your trust in me, and when things are difficult, look to me. And when things are good, look to me. And when things are going just kind of boring, look to me. And remember that I'm at work. And wait. And wait with that expectation. Christmas is coming. Jesus is coming back. Amen? And we have great things to look forward to. So as we continue through this month, we wait for Christmas Day, but we're waiting for something much greater than that. Christmas Day has come. It is gone. And the great news of that Christmas Day is planted in our hearts if we know that God humbled himself for us to be born into this world, to pay the price for our sin, to take care of all that angst, all the fears, to cement the hopes that God put in our hearts of life with him eternal. That is good news. And like David, we need to be doing something. There's also in the book of Luke that Jesus told a parable. He said, I want you to do something. He said, there was a king. And he was going to go on a trip to receive another kingdom. And so he called his servants in here and he said, I want you to take care of my kingdom. I want you to take care of all of my people and all of my holdings and all of my fields and all of my flocks and all of my herds and all of my stuff. Take care of it. The word he uses in the King James was occupy. I want you to occupy until I come back. I want you to move into my kingdom and take care of it. I want you to be responsible for doing the things that I would do, so that when I come back, my kingdom is in place. Not only in place, but it's thriving. I'm entrusting this to you to occupy my place, to live in my place until I get back. So we ask sometimes, God, what do you want me to do while I'm waiting? And he says, I want you to do this. I want you to occupy. I want you to be busy. Not just sitting there twiddling your thumbs. I want you to be busy living my life in my kingdom, representing me well, doing the things that I would do, increasing the borders of my kingdom. Occupy until I come. And so as we wait, we don't just sit around and wait for something to happen. We get busy doing the things that God has called us to do. It's John chapter 15 where Jesus says, I am the vine, you are the branches, and if you remain in me, you will bear fruit. And he says, this is my Father's will, that you bear much fruit, proving that you are actually my disciples. Listen to that again. He says, my Father's desire is that you bear how much fruit? Much fruit. And what does that do? That proves that you're my disciples. Does that just scare anybody a little bit? look back and forth. I want to say, okay, I want to prove that I'm your disciple. How do I do it? He says, bear much fruit. That's how you do it. But I don't know how much fruit I've borne. Well, occupy, get busy. Do the things, speak the word, be like David in Psalm 40. Lord, I spoke your word. I didn't keep quiet. I didn't hide it in my heart. I didn't keep it a secret from anybody else. I told the world what you were doing. I told everybody what you had done. And David was put down as the greatest king that Israel ever knew, because he recounted the glories of God. And God has given us the same message. Wait for me. With expectation, but as you wait, occupy my kingdom. Be busy in my kingdom. Be fruitful in my kingdom. Speak my word. So he's giving us an assurance of waiting, but he's also giving us our marching orders. While you're here on my business. You're here to take care of my kingdom. You are my servants to do my bidding. Well, what's your bidding, Lord? Do things that I would do. We saw the one servant in that parable who just took the gifts that God gave him and hid them. He didn't use them. He didn't build the kingdom. And the story with that servant is that he was thrown out. The talent that he had was taken away from him and given to somebody else. And the people complained, God, why would you do that? This man always has so many more talents than this man. And he says, for those who aren't busy in my kingdom, occupying and doing the things I would do, even what they have will be taken away and given to somebody else. So he gives us a warning. We've got work to do. To make up in our minds as we are quiet in the morning, realizing that God is, there is the time there to realize who God is, so I can go do the same thing he would do. Well, what does God do? Well, he walks on water, right? He raises the dead. He does. I can't do all those things. Here's what God does. He loves his people. He loves the people who don't love him. He sacrifices for the world while we're still enemies. He says, go out and be like me and spread the word of the kingdom. Because you know what? Everybody out there needs what I have. Everybody out there needs the promise of God. Everybody out there needs the presence of God. There is not one person in this world that doesn't need the Lord, and you have him. So go. We're going to sing that song. You know that song? People need the Lord. They need him. And God has put us in the position of bringing him to the world. We're celebrating a great feat, a great act, a great moment in history when God became flesh. But he left with this message: wait for me. But while I'm gone, occupy, be busy, bear fruit, be my representatives to the world, because they need me. And there might be some of us sitting here today that don't have him. We've been searching for him, and we don't know who he is, and we need him. And if you haven't found the Lord, we are ready to help you to find him. He is not far away. He is not hiding. He's not hard to find. He has turned himself over and said, look at me. But a lot of times he does that through his people. And sometimes we let him down. And sometimes people look at the church and they go, I don't want that. Because look at those people. Bunch of hypocrites. They talk about God and goodness, and they go out and they sin like everybody else. And we need to explain. There's no excuse for our sin. We do things that are wrong. We fail to do things that are right. But thanks be to God He saves the miserable people that we are. And he gives us hope to hold our heads up high because he's given us a new name. He says you're no longer children of the world, you're children of the King. You're children of God. And you're pure and blameless in my sight regardless. And maybe you've been discouraged by people in the church. Don't let that discourage you. Once you give your life to Christ, you'll be the same way. You go, oh, I don't want to be the same way. I'm sorry. We're broken people. We let each other down. We don't meet each other's expectations. We fail in so many ways, and yet God still gives us hope. And we wait for that hope. But while we wait, we occupy. And you might be having trouble occupying. You might be having trouble getting busy and bearing fruit. And our elders are standing in the back saying, let's sit down and pray about this. Let's go to God who is our source. Let's go to him who is our strength and pray about these things. And while we sing this song, you might need to go back and meet with the elders and say, let's go to God. You can step out to the prayer room and go meet with the Lord and take your cares to him. So if we can help you to find Christ, be baptized into him, come down here while we stand and sing this song.